Clearly, it's a circumstance that cost Valtteri dearly and cost the team dearly, and one that we're going to put steps in place to mitigate. What in the world happened? A mighty fine question, and in fact this debrief has the most questions we've had so far, just showing you the level of interest in it, and hopefully we can now pick through all of that for you. And we'll go through step by step through this debrief all of the items that led up to this performance and what happened during the course of the race. It's not one item, there's a number across Thursday, Saturday and Sunday. Why did Lewis seem to struggle so much across the weekend relative to Valtteri? And was it something to do with setup? If we go back to Thursday, so first of all, Monaco, we do our free practice on a Thursday, not a Friday, a little bit different to normal. And obviously it's a street circuit that's not used, so it's very dirty and there's a big ramp in. But even so, on Thursday, Lewis was actually very happy. His car was working well, and the times he was setting would have put him fastest across those sessions. Now, it didn't look that way because he had a little bit of traffic with Alonso and Leclerc coming out of the tunnel on his fastest lap, but the performance was there. He was content. As we went into Saturday, that situation inverted, whereas Valtteri perhaps was a little bit behind him on Thursday. Valtteri was very much leading now of our two drivers. So what was the difference? On Thursday, we had around 47 to 50 degrees track temperature, and it cooled down significantly by the time we got to Saturday. We're more around the mid-30s now. Now, that happens on a number of different circuits, but in this particular case, it seems we just weren't able to get ourselves into the right working regime with the tyres, and one of the drivers was just slightly happier than the other, but neither really working the tyres as effectively as we should. We tried a number of setup items, but one of the issues you have in Monaco is it's a confidence builder. You need laps, you need consistent laps, and you need confidence that the car is giving you everything you want out of it. If you can carry just a kilometre an hour or two more speed through turn 1, 2, 3, for example, you generate just another temperature level, another degree or two, which then gives you more grip through the next sequence. Conversely, if you don't have confidence in the car and you don't trust it, you go down the spiral the other way and you lose grip. The setup between the two cars wasn't dramatically different as we went into qualifying and race. Really, what had changed is just we weren't able to extract everything from the car and the tyres as we wanted anymore. Why did Lewis come into the pits that early? It's an interesting question. So if I bring you to what we discussed on Sunday morning, early was actually really lap 20, lap 18. That would have been early in Monaco. That would have been a sensible point if you had to try something, or you're in the lead of the race and you wanted to stop, to fit the hard and go to the end. Lap 30 was what we defined in the morning as late, as very long. Now, that window was created on purpose by Red Bull and Verstappen. They pulled away very quickly and then managed the gap such that the field didn't really have a gap to pull into anymore. So in the case of Valtteri, he had Perez and he also had Vettel behind in his pit window, so we couldn't stop. So he was really just managing everyone's pit stop gaps. That started to open up as we got towards lap 30. But now remember, that's not really early by definition in the race anymore. If we go back to 2019, in fact, we took a lap 10 safety car and went to the end. So these tyres can very much do that distance. Relative to Gasly, we had been behind him all of that first stint, and clearly we weren't going to be able to overtake him on track. And there's only two possibilities. There's an overcut, whereby he stops first and you go longer, and an undercut. That's very typical, and that's all the choices we had available to us. The problem with an overcut is that doesn't exist until Gasly stops. He has to stop to present an opportunity for us to have free air in front of us. He already had a gap to traffic behind, the same gap that we put Lewis into, and he wasn't taking it, which means he wasn't terribly convinced that they had to stop first. They were waiting for us to stop. I'm fairly confident had we waited a lap or two, they still wouldn't have stopped. That now meant that we had an opportunity. We can wait and hope that perhaps something happens to his tyres or a situation takes place, or we can take the prerogative and go for the undercut. On our calculations, we should have come out just ahead of him. It wasn't an easy undercut, but it was an achievable undercut. There was a few issues here. The first is that in Monaco, compared to other tracks, we don't really have enough information to properly define that. The hard tyre wasn't used in FP2. Last time we used it was in FP1 on Thursday, and there was no data from 2019. So it's a little bit of interpolation, or a lot of interpolation, in fact, as to what would have happened with that hard tyre in the outlap. As things ended up, Lewis came out under 0.2 behind Gasly. It was incredibly tight and close, but we were wrong. We didn't undercut. The difficulty in warming that hard tyre on the outlap was such that we didn't complete it. We could have gone longer, so that's the other opportunity, and waited. And there's a few things that pushed us into stopping. Other teams, Valtteri especially, was starting to struggle quite significantly with the tyres. You saw in the case of Valtteri that he was pulling Sainz back with him, and indeed Vettel and Perez were much faster than him behind. That wasn't the only car that was starting to struggle on the tyres. Remember, lap 30 is still quite a long way into the race, and we had a fear that waiting with Lewis and waiting another 2 laps would just put us into a situation where that gap actually got worse to Gasly. It's always harder following a car in front. So as a result, on the balance of everything we had available, on the balance that we thought we could complete a successful undercut, and had we would have been fine relative to Vettel, we decided to do that. Now, as I stand here, clearly it's wrong, and more so than that, we lost multiple positions. Gasly, when he came out, didn't have Lewis's pace. He was several seconds off, and he pulled Lewis back relative to Vettel, who, whilst he wasn't quick, he was quick enough to get the overcut on both of those drivers. How many more laps would Lewis's tyres done if we had gone longer? We obviously, when the tyres come in, we have the ability to wear check them. So you sort of scrape off the surface of dirt and pickup that's on the tyre, and then you can measure specific holes in order to determine how much rubber was remaining. Now, he'd done a really good job of saving his front tyres. They were in quite a good state, but the rear wasn't. The rear was somewhat akin to where Valtteri's was, and that would have been a problem. And just extrapolating a bit, because obviously none of us know, I think we could have done a couple more laps, but certainly we wouldn't have done 10 more. So it's going to be somewhere between those numbers, and how fast we would have been is also difficult to tell. I think what's fair to say is that the Red Bull's end of stint pace, especially with Perez, is something that was outstanding relative to the field and relative to ourselves, and that wouldn't have been achievable given the wear we had. What happened to Valtteri's front right wheel? The whole process is 1.5 seconds. That's it. That's the process of removing a nut, changing a wheel, and refitting the new nut. As a result of that, as I'm sure you can tell, the margin for error is very small. And if just the slightest problem happens, it slows the stop down, or potentially in an absolute disastrous case, this happens. So let's go through a little bit more detail about what the nuts are and why we use the systems we do. So our nuts are what called captive. They're maintained within the wheel and the tyre. So as the wheel comes off, the nut goes with it. And this is what our nuts look like. You can see this ridged area around here, and that's where the socket will connect into and effectively apply force. This is a brand new nut, so you can see there's no wear, and it hasn't been on a race car yet. When the gun connects and it removes the nut such that the nut is now loose and the wheel comes off the car, this is what we would typically expect to see. So you can see some wear patterns now. Now the reason why is because this nut has to hold the wheel to the car such that it can cope with 5G forces in braking and laterally as well. It's a huge amount of force going through the axle and the nut, and clearly we can never have it coming loose. So the gun is an incredibly powerful gun, such that you can actually see the mechanics having to restrain themselves, hold themselves to the ground, otherwise they get rotated with it at the same time. It's an impact force. And what happens is the nut typically loosens in 4 or 5 impacts against it, a hammering action. Now what happened is we came on slightly angled. So when the socket was now connected to the nut, it was slightly angled relative to it. And as a result of that, now instead of distributing the load across all of the nut, it was across a small section. And that tore the metal clean off. And in fact, all of the metal was now removed from the nut. As a result of that, the nut was in place and we were unable to remove it. That's a brief overview of what happened. Clearly, it's a circumstance that cost Valtteri dearly and cost the team dearly, and one that we're going to put steps in place to mitigate. Was there any consideration to send Valtteri back out, for example, changing 3 of the tyres to another set of soft tyres, or fitting perhaps hard tyres on 3 of the tyres and keeping 1 soft? Sadly, we couldn't have done that. We could have and put Valtteri out on track, but we would have been disqualified. You have to, under the regulations, run both sets, 2 different sets of dry specification tyres in the race, and also all 4 corners must match in terms of what compound they are. And we would have triggered a disqualification as a result of carrying on that way. It's an obvious rule if you think about it. In Monaco, for example, if it was just an extra pit stop or a 30-second penalty, you may choose to never come in. But it's there to expressly cover that circumstance. Did you manage to remove that front right wheel from Valtteri's car? It's now Monday afternoon whilst we're doing this filming, and the car is on its way back in a truck. And we expect it here later on this evening. And I'm fairly confident by some time on Tuesday we would have that front right wheel removed. We did certain steps in Monaco to try and remove it, some during the pit stop, also some just afterwards. Ultimately, though, we concluded that to remove that nut, we're going to need some fairly heavy equipment and specialist equipment, and that would be better done here in the factory. More so, it allows us an opportunity to do an autopsy on it, to understand really how that nut was worn, and gather some clues that allow us to do a better job going forward in the future. So as a result of that, we left the wheel on the car and packaged the car back into the truck to bring back here directly. What are some of the positives you can take away from this weekend? I'll start with our core and our ethos within this team, and it's one really of standing up in the case of adversity, the one that accepts that faults and failures are going to happen. What's actually really important is how the team cements itself after that. How do you pick apart the details and learn from it? And more importantly, become stronger at the next event and from then onwards. That culture underpins this team. And what happened this weekend in Monaco will only serve to strengthen that. Already this morning, everyone is doing their utmost to understand every single bit of performance data and reliability and pit stop data such that we move forwards as an entity and as a group. Those positives are incredibly powerful, and ultimately they're the ones that gel the team together such that you can win multiple championships together. So there's a whole heap of positives just in that. But more so than that, Valtteri had the pace this weekend to fight for a podium position. He had the pace in qualifying to be top 3, and even if Leclerc was in there in the race, he would have still had the car to put him on the podium. This was one of our weakest tracks, if not perhaps, and hopefully the weakest. We know that we're going to be stronger at some tracks going forward across the season. And the positives are that even at this outlier track, at this poor track for us, if we can walk away with podium type scoring potential, it means we have a chance to fight for this championship. We had a question coming in stating that we have one disastrous race per season, and a sensible follow-up question, which is how are we going to mitigate against what happened in Monaco? How are we going to move forward from this? So the starting point is, I think it's a fair observation that one race a season ends up being very poor. I think for me that's just an indication that we're a World Championship fighting team. We're on the limit of pushing every boundary. It doesn't matter whether it's car performance or pit stops or human endurance or the drivers taking everything they can to risk everything for every point that is available to them. When you're there, you will make mistakes. What's important isn't the mistakes that you make, it's the corrective action that happens afterwards, and it's how the team bonds following that. So to answer the question, we'll treat this race as we do every race. We break everything down into detail. We separate into various groups within the factory and understand what we could have all done better. Even at Barcelona, there's items, for example, that we can improve upon. And it's no different in Monaco, there's just more of them. And it's how you correct and move forward with all of the little details that ultimately corresponds to how the car will be and how the team will be across the remainder of the season. Thank you very much for all of your questions, and we look forward to answering them again after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.